Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Tom and Joe Show. We are back, finally. We have...
Life gets complicated.
We've been working on
I'm
a top secret thing. You will find more out later. We might mention more about the top secret thing at the end of the episode. I am Tom.
I'm Joe.
And this time we are going to be talking about my choice for anime, The Woman Called Fujiko Mine, which is which is a series in the ongoing adventures of renowned thief Lupin III and his friends, in which we focus upon the femme fatale of the group, Fujiko Mine, and her backstory. And yeah, this is an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean it's a little bit for me. First off, I liked it just fine. It's just I am not usually an episodic person, and I'm not big on these series that have gone on forever and have the same characters do the same thing. But occasionally you can dip in and find a good one that has a different take or something, and I think this qualifies.
So yeah, this is basically one of the not the latest installment, as since this came out in the early 2010s, we've had at least 3 other Lupin series and a CGI film, and I believe even since this was made, a live action film. But I think this is sort of where we need to talk about Lupin III as a series generally before we sort of dive into what makes Fujiko Mine a particularly interesting series. So Lupin III is created by a guy called Monkey Punch, who unfortunately I think died, if not last year, then the year before. It's interesting in that it's probably one of the longest running series. This guy was literally drawing this since the 60s, and it's got this very 60s sensibility, at least in sort of a lot of the anime series. So the first anime series was in the 70s, and since then we've had sort of various series by various animation departments, which sort of obviously either modernise Lupin up to the present day, sort of have him sort of carrying on adventures based upon obviously the manga, and in one truly bizarre film, going up against the animated child sleuth Conan. But probably
Well, it had to happen.
It had to happen. I mean, he's a thief and Conan's a detective, and I mean they've done weirder Conan crossovers than that. But probably,
And both of these franchises like making money. So.
yeah, a lot of money. Lupin is a bit, in terms of anime, is one of the big guns. We are talking a series that has been going since the 60s. We are talking a series that has this bizarre popularity in, of all countries, Italy. This is absolutely massive in Italy, to the extent that I believe a couple of the series before really sort of mainstream streaming took hold were actually exclusive to Italian television stations. But probably from a Western perspective, in terms of the more casual anime fan, most people are going to know Lupin from the film Castle of Colagrossi, which is obviously a pre-Studio Ghibli Hayao Miyazaki film, which is sort of basically really idiosyncratic. When it comes to Lupin, it is not typical of the style. It is a much lighter series. It is a much more Miyazakian take upon the character. Obviously, it's a hugely influential film. You've got to remember, this is bizarrely enough, that if I remember correctly, this turned up in one of sequences from this, I believe, turned up in the game Cliffhanger, which is by the same people who made the very, very famous what's the John Bluth thing, Dragon Slayer. Yeah, so they basically stole animation from this. This thing obviously wasn't out in the US at the time, and they nicked. But it is a film which a lot of sort of animated filmmakers, and
Yeah.
I mean hell, this is a film that sort of in some circles is regarded as an influence on Indiana Jones. I mean, we're talking about a film
Yeah.
that punches. Considering this is like the first Miyazaki film.
Yeah.
This is his directorial debut. Is an absolutely massive.
But also, to what applies to my interests is the Castle of Cagliostro is the Dracula's castle in Castlevania Dracula X for the Super Nintendo.
But of course,
But I think we should probably move on to what we are actually covering.
yeah. So basically, Lupin is sort of a thief character, and what this sort of obviously does, very interestingly, compared to a lot of the Lupin, which is basically run of the mill, sort of basically heist of the week. This takes on an altogether more psychological aspect, focusing on really the only female character in the series, which is Fujiko Mine, who is everything from sort of a rival to Lupin to obviously a romantic foil to basically a friend. And it's sort of really interesting how this series does it. Obviously the key two figures in obviously Fujiko Mine are obviously its creative team, and those are obviously two figures who are fairly influential in modern anime, and that is the figures of
Let me help you out.
Yeah.
Sayo Yamamoto,
Yep.
who
would later
the director,
who would later go on to make a certain little anime called Yuri on Ice.
Yes, and did the opening to Persona 5, and among other things, she is very stylistic, and it is very clear when you are watching a Saya Yamamoto show,
including this one.
Yes.
On scripting duty is the one and only. Have it.
I'm not sure which name you're pulling out here. I'm sorry. I know Shinichiro Watanabe, who is the producer and the music producer, who
it's
the director of Cowboy Bebop.
Mari Okada, and if you know that name, well, you know the style that she comes from. She is one of the big guns. She is a writer who has done everything from series such as Kizunaiva to Black Rock Shooter to Fractal, which we're never going to review.
We have a friend named Dark who absolutely hates that show. I watched the first episode. And I'm like, this isn't really doing it for me. And apparently, I picked the right choice because it goes bonkers.
It goes very, very. It is. It's that famous quote, which is we're going massively off topic here. It's that famous quote: Edison sort of fire bad, science bad, and Thomas Edison was a witch as an anime. It is one of the worst things I've ever seen. We'll go.
Yeah, I know. It's just like I look at her stuff and it's just like 8KB0048, which is it's a series where the band, the idol group is
anime
this group of okay, yeah, that where
and on the other end of the polarity, she's got Iron Blooded Orphans, which is probably one of the best Gundam series in 15 years. She is interesting.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, and also the director and writer of the extremely well-received Makuta When the Promised Flower Blooms, which is very, very good, but fucking depressing.
Like a lot of things.
Yeah, so we get this sort of basically, and obviously you have to obviously realise, this is a character who's been obviously written from a largely masculine perspective for, the last 5 decades. To suddenly have a series where you go, okay, no, these are two female writers writing this character and sort of obviously making the series. It gives us this very different perspective.
And it's different everything, really.
Yeah.
What I first noticed when I came to this was it was very much like it's very much the same series to a certain extent, but it is using uh, like shoujo visual styles. I mean, not strictly shoujo, but like it looks like the series from the 70s that were
Yeah.
made for women for Lupin the Third.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how the visual style goes. There's a lot of shading. There's a lot. There's
It's got that very. I trying to think of a particular series because it does reminds me of. It's got this almost very. It is very 70s. It's got this, and obviously the series sets itself to a certain perspective in this sort of. Not quite determined period between the 60s and the 70s. It's definitely not a modern setting, and it's sort of an interesting because basically what Fujiko Mine does is it does two things. Obviously, it goes into depth, obviously portraying the character of Fujiko Mine, but it also basically acts as a sort of prologue to Lupin as a series as a general thing, because it obviously brings in Lupin, Jigen, and I'm trying to remember the bloody samurai character now. Gomon the 12th or 13th. Gomon the 13th, and it sort of basically does by the end of this series this whole we've got the gang together to do like their first caper, and obviously this series is then followed by 3 films which go into sort of more detail and really do act as a bridging point between Lupin, as most of its audience knows it, and obviously this series.
Yeah,
but it has. But the visual sensibility of this series is. There are a lot of. This is a beautifully animated series.
Yeah, it looks really good. It's very stylized. It knows exactly what it wants to be, and I did come up with the series. I mean, it's not exact fit, but Rose of Versailles.
It's got I would agree.
Got the shadow, the shading, and kind of some of the melodrama, but it also has a lot of the art style from the late 60s and early 70s. Like if you just watch the opening, there's a lot of things where it is very clear what this time, but it doesn't abide by the bad things that the 70s did and the late 60s did, which is overly bright, gaudy stuff. It's just a lot of it looks like an album cover.
Yeah.
I could especially see in the opening where it's not even a song, it's a spoken word poem. It's where they have the owl with the white and black pattern behind it, and that's probably should have been some prog rock band's 70s album cover.
Oh god, yeah, it has got that very sort of the film. No, I'll tell you what it does remind me. I've now remembered. It is a film called, and this is obviously a very interesting and a very avant-garde film called Belladonna of Sadness. And Belladonna of Sadness is a really interesting film from sort of 2 perspectives. One, because it really goes into, because basically in the long and the short of it, it is a film about witchcraft and female power and female sexuality. Albeit an even darker sense than this, because it is an incredibly dark film.
All of the content warnings.
All of it, yeah.
A rough film. I watched it once and I'm thank you. I mean, it's a very good film, but that's enough.
Yeah, it comes very much from that sort of late 60s, because it is. I almost hesitate to describe Belladonna of Sadness as anime. It is almost entirely done in still frames which are panned across, and obviously you get voices and sound effects. It is obviously very reduced. It's that very sort of late 60s, early 70s sort of reduced animation. But yeah, that's
it's watercolors.
But
it's very distinct.
It's a film I wouldn't necessarily recommend people look into, but if you want to obviously sort of see where anime, particularly in terms of shoujo, particularly in terms of josei manga, comes from, I feel like that film should be recommended. But it is that sort of same visual sensibility. It is that very sort of late 60s, early 70s sort of manga is now sort of starting to spread out into distinct genres. You are starting to get more, this is manga for girls, this is manga for boys, and they start to obviously, particularly in the figure of obviously Tezuka obviously drawing both, but by the time you get to the early 70s and you do get to obviously the setting of this series and obviously the manga that existed in the 1970s, which obviously colours this film's visual aspect, you are starting to get a more distinct thing, which obviously is typified, as you said, in Rose of Versailles.
Yeah,
and
it looks, like we said, it looks amazing, and it definitely is of a style. And where was I going with this? I was gonna say something about Belladonna of Sadness. It's like, it's definitely worth seeing once, but it's definitely, if you are sensitive to rape, sexual assault, or that kind of thing, it disguises when it takes place or where it takes place until the end, and you'll understand why at the end. But it is very distinctly, how women are treated in, monarchy times.
Yeah.
So
and
it's very much that, and it is very honest about it.
And I would almost say that the same. Obviously, there is not so much that element of sexuality, but this series is very surprisingly, for a series that obviously comes from a manga that in places is actually quite sleazy. I mean, this is the thing. You obviously, in the West, you get this idea of Lupin being this very clean cut, the gentleman thief. The original manga is raunchy as fuck.
Oh yeah,
it is like surprise, and obviously a lot of it is obviously toned down in the various anime, and obviously the fact that the most popular version is a PG compared to a lot of the Lupin films, which are 15s if not above.
A lot of these things from the time were made for adults. I mean, obviously the extreme is Golgo 13, but this is kind of in the same league of, this is for adults, and then they kind of got this hit for everyone. So they just kind of had to fine tune it for, everyone to watch, and then you just print money, and that's what Monkey Punch did.
Yeah, I mean, I've dalliance with Lupin, but I have Lupin merch. I have like a really nice figure of, actually sitting next to me. It's a nice figure of Lupin. And there's the whole thing about, this is just again a complete aside, but you can sort of date what period a Lupin is from the colour of his jacket. One of these completely random asides, but yeah. So I feel we need to sort of talk about, before we sort of dive into the series as a whole, sort of how it deals with its protagonist, because this is kind of obviously, particularly coming from Yamamoto, it is a remarkably refreshing sort of view of female sexuality in places.
Yeah, it's just basically she is completely in control of her sexuality, and it's just like, I like sex. Sometimes I like being nude. Okay, if she wants to be, topless on the beach, that's what she's gonna do with her life. And it's kind of like they kind of do that, and it's. It's directed and written by a female, and it's just like, it's just what people gonna do.
And I feel like that female writer and that female director do sort of give it an element that I don't think, I'm gonna be blunt. If this was directed and written by a man or a mostly male team, this would not be so sort of matter of fact about, I think, a lot of the nudity in this. This would be far more, lewd, sort of lurid, and far more sort of, vision, sort of the typical thing you would expect from a male to male orientated fan service. It would be tit shots and ass shots and all the, which, don't get me wrong, I could understand if you were doing like a series of that sort of point of view, but like obviously if you're trying to do the thematic heavy lifting that this film does, yeah, that doesn't work. And it's like,
Yeah, because it's just like she's kind of been Fujiko has been kind of been the girl of the series. I
yeah.
mean, and there are things that have been done better. There are things that have done worse with it. But there's. I mean, this is kind of the series that makes her a character and finds out, essentially what makes her tick from the beginning, which is, from the, even the opening song, which is not a song. It is a spoken poem with music in the background, which I suppose most music with lyrics is, if you think about it. But
it does sound like something Kate Bush would come up with. I mean, it's even called New Wuthering Heights. It sort of sounds like something you'd have as a sort of an interlude track on like early 80s Kate Bush, except it's all in Japanese.
Yeah, and that's another thing, like Wuthering Heights, which is the reference they bring in, which is by one of the Bronte sisters. And that's certainly something, like Saya Yamamoto would have definitely been more familiar with than, say, if Shinichiro Watanabe did this.
Yeah, and I feel that's sort of the basically as having a female, you are going to obviously get a different story, and it sort of feels very much like this is obviously Yamamoto goes on to do an extremely well received and extremely nowadays probably quite an influential series in terms of how sort of you write characters in a more feminine point of view. Obviously Yuri on Ice is a remarkably daring work in that it sort of makes boys love, which is obviously this sort of forbidden secret sort of thing that basically gets hived off onto its own sort of thing. We will eventually come to talk on Yuri on Ice, almost guarantee it. But it's interesting to sort of view this series as a female perspective on this character who has so often been written by men. And a lot of that does reflect itself in the narrative. It's almost even compared to other incarnations of Lupin, this is very much, if she's not calling the shots in a lot of these episodes, she has a lot more agency, because it does feel to me like a lot of the time in the more mainstream Lupin, obviously as the more recent series obviously do rebalance this somewhat, probably in the aftermath of Fujiko Mine, because obviously that increased her popularity as a character, and obviously you've got this whole new dimension you've hinted at. But it's quite a refreshing series. It's nice to have.
And it's one of those that gives the psychological depth without stepping on toes. I think since it's a big franchise, they don't want to completely rewrite and back build the character. So it's a very weird series to talk about structurally, because it is episodic, but it is not as episodic as you think it is. And it's just like it's set up to go into the deep psychological depths, but it doesn't do it the way you think it will. Like, it's going to make this backstory that completely tells how she got here, which it looks like it's leading up to that, and then it goes off somewhere else. And it's interesting to talk about like that. I mean, it would probably I probably will not watch this again, just because my life is just extremely busy. But it probably would be worth going through a second time, and looking at how they set up things, because there is a method, and even though most of these are episodic, there are elements that are not episodic that they're feeding into later in the show. Like the first episode where they're going to this island of cultists whose the cult leader's skin creates this drug, and it's just a one-off. They're trying to steal Lupin and Fujiko are trying to steal this giant statue of drugs.
As one does.
Yes, one does. And you think it's just a one-off, and it's just an introduction to how these two characters meet each other and how they interact with each other. And that, to an extent, is true, but there's this part of it that comes back later, and it is it is one of the things that sets the plot in motion, even though nobody realizes that at the time.
Yeah, and the thing is, I like about this, I like this is I will probably watch this again, principally because I just like series like this, that sort of do go a little bit sort of into depths, because this is almost unique. It's sort of, I'm trying to think of another series that goes into an already developed character as much, because I think I'm trying to think of another series of anime that does that, apart from possibly the sort of, things that the Gundam series that are from Char's perspective. But it's like, yeah.
I can think of a few. It's just currently right now my brain has been fried by the world burning down.
Yeah.
So I wish there was a better time to record this, but we've kind of put it off enough.
Yeah. So I think at this point we do need to sort of talk about the general sort of plot of this series, because it's sort of it's a series that once sort of manages to cover a lot of ground and sort of at the same time seems to be like a little bit hamstrung by the fact it's only 13 episodes.
To a certain extent, I don't think I would want it any longer. Is the only thing.
Yeah.
It's not that I dislike it or like the direction that it's going. I think it says what it needs to say and go.
Yeah.
I think if it was any longer, I already have a problem with like the episodic episodes being overshadowed by the later episodes, because I am remembering all of the later episodes and some of my memory, and I didn't watch them that long ago, and I having trouble remember the one where they bring in Jigen, who is the guy who is an ace gunsman.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
he has
so I think we go from the drugs episode to Jigen to introducing going on the train, which is actually one of the better sort of standalone things that it sort of does very much sort of. And what it does very neatly is it almost links each of these three characters in the Lupin gang to Fujiko before sort of basically bouncing them off each other, which I do think does work to the series in its merit. If you try to do all three of them at once, or introducing, I don't know, Lupin to Jigen and both of them to Fujiko in an episode, it'd be like, this is trying to do way too much at once. So I think the episodic nature, but the problem is you get a couple of episodes of this where it's just like, and this has impact on the plot where? The most egregious of which is sort of this Cuban Missile Crisis episode.
Yeah, it is very weird. I mean, this is by far the weirdest episode because I get what they were trying to get at, but I don't get how this is. I mean, it's supposed to be a political satire on everyone. It's supposed to be like Dr. Strangelove or something like that. And it's supposed to be how Fujiko and Goemon get involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis, but it has none of the elements of how the Cuban Missile Crisis came about. Besides, it has, it does not use any of the players. This is a fictional universe where they have hot version of
anime Fidel Castro. I shit thee not.
Anime Fidel Castro. Yeah.
Although it's sort of a mixture
hot and
mixture of Che
Fujiko's
Guevara.
Very into him, and hot Fidel Castro has to go to the UN to speak because apparently in this universe that actually means something instead of you just said something at the UN and then either Russia or the United States just says no and then you disappear. That's what happens at the UN.
And there's some oil fields in this episode, which sort of, are they there? Are they not there? Who knows? Who cares?
Who cares? But they're on a plane to the UN. So Fujiko and hot Fidel Castro are in it, and then the Russians and the Americans are trying to kill Fidel Castro on the way there, and then it just gets into a to-do where the Russians and the Americans are like, "Oh, you're in our airspace. No, you're in our airspace," and their planes trying to literally shoot them down, and then it's almost like and it's some sort of satire, and there's some things that are satire, like, there's the ending where, like, there's this Russian head who is calling all the shots, and with his, toady, who is, like, agreeing with him, and at the end the toady goes, well, I had nothing to do with it. These were all your orders. And there's some of that, but, like, I really don't know what this episode was trying to do. The targets are there. What it's trying to do is there, but the dots don't connect.
And then Goemon chops through a nuclear missile.
Yep.
That happened.
Did he use the quote, I have cut another useless thing? I know the English translation.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. I was waiting for them to say that for, nuclear weapons, like, hey, but I don't think they ever delivered that in the way that's like,
yeah,
nukes or something.
Nukes are bad, yeah. And the thing is...
Yeah, go ahead.
And the thing is, it's like, this comes like almost halfway through the series. It's just sort of there, and it does, like, at least with like most of the other episodes, it has some impact on the plot. This honestly feels like the one they've just gone, oh fuck, we're gonna have to do 13 episodes. Hot Fidel Castro, there we go. Yamamoto, what is this? It's anime Fidel Castro. Yamamoto, what are you doing? It's anime Fidel Castro.
Well, and also, I'm sure there are some script writers and people who are involved. I mean, obviously the director has to sign off on it, but, eventually you just gotta, like, okay, we're gonna go with this and run because you only have a certain amount of time to make things.
Oh, absolutely. It's probably Okuda anyway. It's Okuda's bizarre Fidel Castro thing. But which is a pity, because the rest of the series is really damn good in places.
Yeah. I think my only complaint is, like, the episodic stuff isn't as tightly written. Like, if they were by themselves, would they be as good than if they were in just this series as a whole? And I don't find, like, the episodic stuff is, that good. I don't, like, all of the stuff I remember from the series, and it's just, like, is all the stuff that connects to later. Like, the episode where there is this woman who is sold as, like, this tattooed, like, sex slave, and, like, Fujiko is really intent on killing her because it reminds her of herself when she's younger, and it's a part of herself she wants to destroy because she hates it. And that, it's like, it has some weird asides at the end where they go off to this, like, hot springs, and where if you, like, walk into it, you die, or if you do any of this, and it has that setup that's really weird, but the impact of it is there, and that's what I remember, most from these series and all of it.
And the problem is, I feel like if one is going to say something against this series, it feels like the problem is with this series is, before we really get into sort of, the nitty gritty of it, it's doing two things at once, because it's not just, here is Fujiko Mine, this is a character exploration of Fujiko Mine and how she relates to these various members of this group, and sort of how she comes to terms with herself as a person and how she deals with childhood trauma. It is also, here is Lupin, here is Jigen, here is Goemon, let's introduce them to each other, let's get the gang together. And the problem is that it's sort of, I feel if it had been a little bit stronger on the first point and had a little bit less of the sort of the second point, I feel it would be a stronger series and it would be a little bit less episodic. Because it has this other thing to do, whilst obviously it, basically fleshing her character out and sort of, exploring her as a character. It's got to go, oh, by the way, I've got to have one or more of these three in the episode. I'm trying to think, if apart from, anime Fidel Castro, which still has Goemon on it, in a minor cameo, it is still very much, no, there is one of them, if not more, in the episode, and a lot of screen time is taken up with basically run-of-the-mill Lupin hijinks, which would be great in a normal Lupin series. In this sort of weird psychedelic 1970s shoujo thing, it feels, despite some really nice animation, simply a bit bloody weird. It's like, you
Yeah.
have this sort of very visually arresting, very female orientated, very female, basically, taking the influence of female creators as a basis for a female story,
Yeah.
during which you have
But
run-of-the-mill Lupin hijinks.
and then they just have. I'm just going to bring this up right now because they have. The weirdest part of it is Zenigata, the detective who is always after Lupin III and everybody else and is trying to stop everything. The one, Zenigata fucks, as you have said.
Zenigata absolutely fucks, and fucks multiple times in this series.
Yeah, and
I'm sorry, that's really angered the shippers. He probably shipped Lupin and Zenigata, but Zenigata fucks women.
Yeah, and which is another part to like the weird addition to this series is Oscar, which I'm trying to remember. Is Oscar a major fixture to this series, or is...
I'm trying to remember. I don't think Oscar is purely in this. I think Oscar does appear in the manga. I will add an annotation here if that's not correct, and if he is exclusive to the anime. But it builds him up as far more of a sort of almost a secondary antagonist in this series, because boy, we need to talk about Oscar.
Yeah, because that I am sure this is Yamamoto's big addition, because Oscar is very clearly gay for Zenigata, and Zenigata does not return the favor. And that psychologically messes with him, and the fact that he has relationship with Fujiko at one point really sets him off, and that I would say he kind of becomes, more antagonistic to Fujiko than Zenigata does. Zenigata's doing his job essentially, and he is way more angry at Lupin III. Because Lupin III taunts him, and Fujiko is just a thief. But Oscar's sexual frustrations lead to like really crazy things later on in the show. And I probably should let you take this for like your impressions of Oscar.
I'm very much in the same camp. I think he is, particularly considering this is obviously, a creator who's done some really, really good male characters both before and after this, and frankly in both cases, Mari Okata has written some really great male characters in the... This is some really, particularly from my perspective, it's a little bit backward. It's like, okay, we've got now this sort of really frustrated, male character who's, the pretty... I mean, he is prettier than Fujiko in a lot of sequences, and cross-dresses at one point. And it feels a little bit... It is the one part of this series where it does not feel, empowering. It is very much sort of, I'm trying to sort of basically put this word. It feels like something out of a bad sort of mid-70s yaoi series. It really does.
Yeah.
It's like, I have been spurned by you because you are not attracted to me. You are only attracted to women. I will now do terrible things to sort of to sort of get my own back. And it's like, you've basically just made a gay character, your secondary antagonist.
Yeah,
and it's like, that's not a good look. And it's the one thing.
It's especially weird considering she later went on to do Yuri on Ice.
Yeah, which has got really well sort of presented, obviously male couples, and it does very much move beyond this sort of very traditional view of the whole seme-uke dynamic of the very feminine and the very masculine sort of relationships in that whole schisms, which we're not going to get into because it's a whole bloody
that's a whole to do.
That's a whole discussion on its own.
You've got that show in your back pocket to talk about.
I've got that show in my back pocket. I've got others. But it's yeah, Oscar is, which is a pity because Oscar has the potential to be a really interesting character of being, considering that sort of the other four major male characters in this, and a lot of obviously the supporting male characters, are basically these almost stereotypically, particularly in the case of Jigen and Jigen is probably Jigen and Zenigata are these very masculine, very sort of tough, very sort of almost sort of very cold figures. To have a different a different perspective on it, to have a character that feels as empowered as Fujiko does, even though obviously he is obviously in love with another man. I feel like he is a wasted potential in this series,
Yeah.
basically speaking.
Yeah. Maybe that's just to fit with the 70s. We're making this series in the 70s, like, a shoujo, and definitely a shoujo from the 70s would make a gay man a vengeful villain, and to a certain extent.
Yeah, I mean,
But
hell, the original, even Miyazaki has gone on like record saying, yeah, the villain from Castle Caligorossi is absolutely homosexual.
yeah, so it's kind of,
Yeah, it comes with unfortunately, it comes with the territory.
yeah, it's the other essentially, which is a weird thing, like making this person that's outside the norms like the villain because they are outside the norms, which is extremely weird because all of the main characters essentially live outside the norms to a certain extent. Like Fujiko is fine just being a woman who expresses her sexuality, and you know
Yeah,
my train of thought is just like kind of crashed there. But
no, I agree. He is very much sort of. He feels like, as a character, the series one sort of bigot is the he and it's like it's a pity because he is an interesting character, and it is interesting to sort of write a character who is struggling with the fact that he is a homosexual man in the 1970s, where it was like okay,
yeah,
and obviously I'm not an expert on Japanese view of homosexuality, but it's always been a little bit more, obviously being Japan being comparatively conservative, to be homosexual in Japan. But it also feels to me like here's the one moment this series sort of almost sort of loses track of what it's actually trying to say, which is a pity because it's like he's an interesting character and it's his mental unravel. I don't so much have a problem with him becoming a villain. It's more that it is such a bizarre sort of he goes from being a rival to Fujiko to being flat out villainous in one episode, and it's like okay, I can appreciate he's had like a bad point with her, but it's such a sudden switch, and it's almost such a sudden introduction to this other side of him that it does feel sort of rushed, if nothing else. Which is a pity because the rest of this cast is amazing. It is very much sort of I feel okay. I've said that obviously this series is trying to do too much by being both an introduction to Fujiko and an introduction to the rest of the group, but the rest of the Lupin gang are really well done in this, and it's surprising that we're only now coming to talk about Lupin in obviously a Lupin series, because I think this might be the best version of Lupin we've had for a while, and it's nice. It's nice to sort of see that this him basically being this very, it's not quite an embryonic version of the character, but you can still see where he's still trying, slowly becoming the sort of the more recognizable version of the character. And it's sort of he is absolutely, and obviously his scenes with Fujiko are very well done.
They are. He certainly sees Fujiko as the other side of the coin to himself. So, and that's where the admiration comes from, and she's also like a respected competitor. So that's they kind of build their repartee and their relationship from there.
And Jigen and obviously Goemon are nicely fleshed out. If I have one sort of thing, it is very much sort of like this series doesn't really know what to do with obviously the friendship between Goemon and Lupin for sort of some episodes. So you sort of have this really elongated sort of points where they are like, are they actually working with each other? Are they basically, is this a sort of a team ship or a team of convenience? And it sort of does take a little bit too long for those two to sort of working together. I mean, the series obviously has its reasons for it, but it's like it does.
Yeah, you see Gomon and Jigen a whole lot more than you get Gomon like talking to Lupin or like forming that relationship. Although the Gomon and Jigen definitely pays off.
Definitely. I mean, it's nice, and I think the art style actually is particularly lends itself well to sort of obviously portraying these three characters, because it's like it is a little bit different from the Lupin art style, but it never loses what actually obviously makes these characters visually iconic, which is sort of a nice halfway house. But I feel at this point, obviously having discussed sort of basically everything else, yeah, we're gonna have to talk about spoilers, aren't we?
Yeah, we're gonna have to get into the spoiler section.
Yeah. So
just one more thing. I want to talk about the music briefly. It was produced by Shinichiro Watanabe, obviously the director of Cowboy Bebop and all that. And usually he has really great taste. I don't think it works. I think they were trying too hard to get the low-key jazz from the era.
Oh, yeah.
And it kind of drags the series a little bit. Like they're trying to do like too much of the same thing, like too much of the same kind of low-key jazz.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of moments where it works. When it actually goes into sort of more bebop-ish jazz and sort of more sort of action-orientated, it works better, but it's sort of in a long sort of chunks of this, it is... This sound design is really boring. You have actually managed to make, and I get they are going for a particular mood, and I get that they are going for a particular aesthetic, but it's like, Watanabe, Yoko Kanno. Get Yoko Kanno in.
I don't know what Yoko Kanno is doing. I mean, I wonder if she was supposed to do like music stuff for the Olympics or something, and that just fell out because of COVID-19. But I don't know. She can now do whatever she wants and can demand whatever price she wants at this point. So
all hell Yoko Kanno.
I don't know what she's doing at this point.
Being Yoko Kanno.
Yep.
AKA fucking awesome.
Essentially being the human version of Ed. That is, in an interview, that's how they described Yoko Kanno.
Yeah. We all love Yoko Kanno.
So anyway, now spoilers.
Spoilers.
Everything from now and then, spoilers.
Warning, spoilers. Boy, that's the owls are not what they seem.
No, absolutely not. I thought the owls were just going to be this symbol of male gaze, like this, and I suppose it still is. It still very much is, but like.
No, they are literally fucking owls.
The flashback to all of these owls, like, sexually prodding or, kind of shocking Fujiko. And it just comes in this middle of the series, this episode that feels like it has nothing to do with it. And it's just like, well...
that was dark.
That was dark, and it's like, where did that come from? And then... It eventually tells you where that comes from, as there's this character named... Oh, gosh. Luis U. Almeida. Okay, it's like getting the name straight is...
Yeah, he's a man with a funky name with a lot of owls. Because the owls are the owls are owls.
Yeah, they're owl people, except when they're not, and I am kind of confused, and I don't know what's going on here, but But yeah, they're owl people.
Yeah. Putting out
And
fires with
they
gasoline.
are rich.
Owl people.
And they apparently had Fujiko in a possession at one point, and they did some very weird experiments. And I think one of the best episodes is the village episode, where they go to this abandoned village from this pharmaceutical company, which it is very 70s, and I can't help but approach it from like practical standpoints of later stuff. It's just like, why would you? They're doing something to create peace in human beings, and this is all the experiment to do it. But it's just like, what? How are you doing this, and like, what is this supposed to be accomplished? And are you supposed to make a drug from this? And I mean, there are some results from that. I mean, obviously they go back, and these people were responsible for making that drug from the first episode, and that's, you know, a connecting point, and that's some of the results from this. But it comes up like, you spent all of this money doing this, and they essentially destroyed an entire village and then swept it under the rug because they were doing human experimentations, and it didn't work out. And there's this flashbacks that assumes Fujiko was a part of it, but Fujiko wasn't a part of it.
Yeah, and that's sort of, and what it does is, this is my biggest issue with, well, it's sort of an issue with the series, but I don't think it is an issue. It's both an issue and not an issue, because it basically almost sort of swings itself up into this sort of, you know, this great big revelation, and the great big revelation is, yeah, it wasn't you.
Yeah,
it's
the
like
big revelation is the child who was being tormented and tortured by these people wasn't Fujiko Mine. It was this girl who was the daughter of this doctor whose ghost apparently talks to Fujiko about the past of this village. And then this pharmaceutical company created this amusement park just for this daughter, and it's like this broken down amusement park that apparently still operates. I don't know what this amusement park was, why a pharmaceutical company just built this.
It's repressed memories world.
Because it makes a great setting, and it makes great action settings. I am trying to think about, like, wow, this is a giant waste of money. I mean, like, how much money? I mean, you weren't 2000s pharmaceutical companies. I mean, I'm sure pharmaceutical companies in the 70s were quite wealthy. But once you get to the 90s and 2000s, where they are buying up half the ads in all of newscasts everywhere, they aren't that powerful yet.
Yeah. I mean, also Japan...
They can't just buy a fuck-off amusement park.
Yeah, I mean, Japan did go through this weird period in the sort of the late 90s and the 2000s of having this amusement parks boom and then very quickly bust, which obviously...
That was the 80s. That was the bubble economy.
Yeah.
Because that was where... It's weird that it's here.
Yeah.
But I am thinking too much about periphery stuff.
Thinking too much about...
Which is what my ADHD will do. It is not a cinema sin. It is not anything. They chose a pharmaceutical company because they needed something that could do experiments and be wealthy. And they picked, the amusement park because it is a good and creepy setting to have the final couple episodes.
And
That's it, Joe. It's okay if it doesn't make sense.
I mean, it is a hell of a final. These final two episodes are probably worth the series on its own, even if you like skip a couple of the more filler episodes. I would say watch these two because they're the ending, and two, they're probably actually the best two episodes in the series. And it sort of very much starts to pull, obviously, not only the threads of the whole group together, but obviously the threads of sort of what the entire plot of this series has been about, which is basically, well, Fujiko Mine is Fujiko Mine, and Fujiko Mine is her own sort of woman, bizarrely enough. Mm-hmm. It's actually quite refreshing that it basically almost starts back. It goes, yeah, that trauma. You're not like this because of trauma, and you're certainly not like this because of experiments carried out on you as a child. It is you are like this because you've always been like this.
Yeah, because you are you. It's just like
Yeah.
that. It goes back to this trope of all of these femme fatales, or like
Mm.
all of the. Speaking of like weird parts of with Oscar, it's just like it's weird that the main character is the femme fatale who is always the other, who is like the sexual woman who takes, the man away from what is right and is the bad person, and makes her human and makes her a perfectly, you know, decent character to a certain extent. That, and then we have Oscar, who is the outside as the gay man, and he is bad,
Yes.
and that's so it's
Yeah.
another interesting standpoint. But yeah, it takes this trope that she's like this because she had trauma in her life, and just turns it around. It's like, no, she is her own woman, and this is what she does. What she chooses to do with her life. It has nothing to do with trauma, and the only reason she has this is because she got fucked with by these owl people, and it eventually turns out the daughter was behind this whole thing, she was trying to live vicariously through Fujiko Mine, and she thought she found her puppet to do this.
Nope.
And I nope. It was me. It was me this whole time.
Yeah, the thing is, I do like how this series sort of does build itself very neatly to this point, and then absolutely wrong puts its audience. It's actually quite refreshing to sort of see something that goes, no, it's not what you think it is, because it does very much build this mystery to sort of basically over its first 11 episodes, and it goes very much sort of oh, this is all because of your trauma. You're a bad person because you basically had a bad childhood, oh, and therefore you almost get a reflection of that in Oscar, who's basically her character arc minus her sort of quote unquote redemption in miniature, because obviously Oscar is indicated to have had a pretty shitty childhood too, and obviously been redeemed through his sort of relationship, both professional and otherwise, with Senegata. And it sort of goes, nope, you think, nope.
Well, I mean, he sort of does get redeemed at the end, because he sacrifices himself onto that bomb, which is supposed to, but it's still...
Yeah,
Oscar does a lot of nasty things and has a lot of, like, just really nasty opinions about Fujiko.
Yeah.
Because, it's just like the serial killer who is sexually frustrated to a certain extent is, the vibe you get off of Oscar. I mean, he's not a serial killer, although he does, like,
kill somebody.
Get to murdering people at the end because his frustration gets too high. So, it does boil over. It does. I mean, he does get some redemption, but there is like something that he is past the point of redemption, and he has to do this sacrifice as the only way to make it right.
Yeah, which is again not particularly from people who've written these really well done characters elsewhere is I know obviously you got to sort of go, well, it's period appropriate, and if not, it will be, well, you've basically just written a character who doesn't appear anywhere else in the series. But at the same time, it's like, really, that's weirdly backwards for two people, for people writing characters from that perspective. My other real issue with this series is, it's uneven as hell.
Yeah. Well, it's the nature of episodic. I am just not a person who likes episodic. I like watching something that I know is going to, go somewhere. If I'm just going to watch the same characters do the same thing, I've got other things I need to do. I got a backlog. I got to move. But which is just how I do things.
Which is fair enough.
It's I mean, even watching Cowboy Bebop, I will watch like the episodes where it's with like Vicious in it, and it's actually going through Spike's backstory in his presence. I will actually I will sit down and watch those every time. And then there's, sometimes if it's like Gateway Shuffle, I'll be like, I got other stuff to do.
Yeah, I can understand. I mean, you honestly could boil this down to probably with. I mean, you could probably chop out at least 3 or 4. You could probably chop this out of 3 or 4 episodes and make this like an eight episode OVA series. But
Yeah.
I feel like you would lose a little bit of the development. I mean, there's a few moments there's a few episodes in this series which are they don't really serve the plot. I mean, there's an episode which basically is reverse Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah.
And it's like,
oh yeah, I wanted to say that was probably my worst episode, just because it like how it sets up things. Like it is that episode is so lazy. I mean, I don't want to say lazy because that's just insulting, but there's just like they go to the top of the opera house and it's like, oh hey, we're keeping bees, and then it's just like there's that drop where it's like, I wonder if the bees are going to play a factor later in this episode.
yes, they do.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's like some of the episodes of this are like, there's an episode, like episode 5, which is basically Egypt, barely has Fujiko in it.
Yeah.
Like, you could honestly have given Fujiko's role to, another character or a one-off character going, yeah, your greed is going to destroy you. Your greed is going to destroy you if you basically trace after treasure, without, a plan, or, realizing that you can't steal everything.
I mean, that one was a very 70s episode, so I understood it, but until now, when you brought it up, I had absolutely forgotten it existed.
Yeah, I mean, there's like, I would say the basically, if you wanted to, if you wanted to boil this down, you could basically watch the first 3 episodes, episode 6, which obviously introduces Oscar, and then episode 9, 10, 11, 12, which basically you could basically, as I said, boil it down to an 8-episode OVA series. The rest of it is like, it's good filler, and it sort of obviously does build, basically if you want a series which, basically concentrates on Fujiko as a character and sort of basically gets to the gist of who she is, you could watch those 8 episodes and leave the other 5 just, without watching it. If you're more of a Lupin, and I feel like this is the sort of the problem, the key problem with this series is it is trying to be, an introduction to Lupin, as well as being a series about Fujiko, and that's the problem with it. I feel is it is trying to do this sort of this balancing act at once, introducing, the lay audience to these characters and how these characters interact with each other and how these characters got to know each other, whilst, basically doing this deep dive into the personality of a character who's got 40 plus years of development. And I feel that's the issue with it. It is trying to do two fairly heavyweight things that on their own could make 13 episode series at once.
Yeah. I mean, all that said, we have like our nitpicks because I don't think it's unfair to come into this series with high expectations because it is, a huge franchise and it's getting a take by, a very specific artist, and it's promising these things from like the get-go. Like the opening, poem is this written poem about how she psychologically, will read and, destroy. I mean, I wouldn't say destroy, but, run through, a man, how like, how she as a woman uses her sexuality to just read through men and, take what she wants and, this addiction of thievery and all of this stuff. And, from the get-go, it promises that. And then there's, the hot Fidel Castro on a plane and, not John F. Kennedy and, not the Russian rulers at the time fighting each other and, just stuff like that. It's
Yeah, you sort of go, hang on a minute, is this the same? You know, is this the same series as like Femme Fatale? It's it's Hot Fidel Castro, and I can't believe we've said that word about 5 times now.
I know it's just a bizarre detail,
Yeah.
and I mean, there's a lot of bizarre details in here, but they mostly work, and it's just
Yeah.
like you can't fault them for like trying to
Mm.
do all of these things, and some of them are never going to stick. I am a writer, and I have done creative stuff, and it's just like it's not just you have this giant mold of perfect in your head, and it goes straight to the text, and everything is perfect. Like that we get like 3 or 4 great movies from Hollywood a year is a miracle, because like making a good movie is almost an accident, even if you know exactly what you're doing.
Oh, absolutely,
So
yeah.
there are things that are not going to work, and it's just like we can nitpick all day. This is still a really good series, and it's still very much worth watching. It's
Yeah.
just like it's one of the ones where you can see what it's doing, and when it does what it's doing, it works really well, especially when it's like doing those disturbing flashbacks where definitely Saya Yamamoto watched Belladonna of Sadness.
I mean,
And
I would totally recommend this. If you
Yeah.
are, if I would probably recommend this, and I would certainly, although I've not seen them as of yet, I would certainly recommend the films that accompany this, which is obviously The Grave of, and I've completely forgotten his name again. Samurai Man. Yeah, The Grave. There's 3.
Goemon?
There's a Grave of Goemon.
I'm probably saying Goemon. very mu-
Goemon. I don't know.
Goemon.
Goemon. Yeah.
I try to be good at my pronunciations, but
Yeah.
it's
No, the films which accompany this are definitely, from all accounts, worth checking out. They are very well made films. They're obviously in this extremely beautiful art style, but given a cinematic budget, which that alone is like, holy shit, we need to watch this at some point.
yeah.
And they obviously flesh out the characters more, and there is more focus on each of the basically the Lupin trio alongside Fujiko. This series, though, I would definitely recommend to sort of Lupin fans, particularly if you are, a seasoned Lupin veteran and you've somehow never seen this before. Because this is really well made. This is a really well made thing. I would hesitate to sort of recommend this to, really casual fans. I think they'll probably get more out of Castle of Calagrossi and some more of the more recent Lupin series, particularly parts 4 and part 5, which obviously are a more traditional take on Lupin. But, once you've watched these, watch this, because, okay, it's a little bit visually idiosyncratic, it's a little bit more, a different gaze, a female gaze on a female character, but this is a damn good series for all its faults.
I mean, I really liked it. I wouldn't. It's just like, it's just because of what I like and how I like series. It's like I can't really call it a great series, but yeah, I mean, when it gets going, it is really damn good. It is. It is. I would not steer anybody away from it unless obviously you have the Belladonna of Sadness. There are some like scenes where it is very disturbing, and where it is very, very much their males prodding at Fujiko, and it's meant to imply deeper things, like it's kind of more psychological rape than it is like the physical stuff, but it that still can be terrible and to a certain extent worse. So I mean, it does, but when it gets going and when it really works, it really works. I mean, it's like we have only touched on about like 10% of the last episode of what makes it great. There's like Goemon and Jigen having their showdown on drugs, and I think it's Goemon who is dressed as Fujiko.
Yep. Because basically plot. The whole amusement thing is like entirely Fujiko themed. because
Yeah.
somebody is a creepy, obsessed thing and has built an entire amusement park which is Fujiko themed, because why not?
Because they have fuck off money.
Yes, they are a pharmaceutical
So,
company in the 1970s.
yeah.
Everyone's on
So,
pharmaceuticals.
but I think that's all we have for that one.
Yeah.
And we've been going about an hour and 10,
Yeah.
so.
The only thing I would say is, I wouldn't recommend watching this series with your parents. It is very much
Oh,
sort
no,
of, you know,
absolutely not.
I mean, really,
There's just.
really, if you are
There's
watching,
casual nudity and
there is-
casual sex.
there is a lot of tits
right there.
in this series. It's like, you know, this series
Yeah.
is not is. I wouldn't say it's like, you know, it doesn't. It certainly doesn't have this pornographic sort of view. It is just, you know, this is how Fujiko is as a character, even in, you know, to obviously a more toned down extent in the series in general. She doesn't particularly dress conservatively.
No. Or dress at all.
Yes.
Sometimes, yeah.
So don't watch this with your parents. I would probably recommend, really, if you're watching. I mean, obviously, we're just saying this generally. If you were watching this entire series and you're really under the rating, I probably wouldn't recommend it. I would,
Yeah.
I would hesitate to recommend this to anyone really under 15, more because it is just because of basically its thematic sort of thing, and
Yeah.
you know how it approaches, you know how it approaches this, and obviously, you know, it's how it approaches, you know, obviously its main plot. Other than that, it's a good series, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Joe, what are we watching next time?
I
What?
struggled with figuring out what to do next because I didn't want to just like, oh, this is a good series, and let's all talk about how good it is. Like, that's going to be our whole series, and, you know, it gets boring. But I do not want to just go down the road where we're just watching crap and it's like, oh, look at the crap. So I wanted to get an interesting series. I have no idea how you're going to react to it. I have, you know, no idea if you're going to think it's good or not. Like, I still don't know if I think it's good. I gave my rating. I gave it a decent enough rating back when I originally reviewed it, but I said it definitely needs to be revisited and reassessed, because like the way you instantly react to it is not maybe how it should stand. And the series I'm going to start with, I mean, all this build up, and it's Charlotte. It is a series that came out a few years ago. Key wrote it, and it is by PA Works, the famous you know, anime company. But yeah, it is a very interesting series, and I'm gonna give you a homework assignment on it where watch the first episode, and I want you to write down where you think the series is going.
Okay, this one I have to confess, I know nothing about, so this is going to be an interesting episode. Right.
I'm just going to tell you this: whatever you do, whatever you write down on where you think it's going, it's wrong. You are going to be wrong.
And the listeners
that's
at
all
home
I'm
can
gonna
do
say.
that too. And the listeners at home can do that too. Because
By the way, have we set up our Patreon yet, or?
we are setting up a Patreon very shortly.
Okay.
We have, so you will be able, ladies and gentlemen, and other people, you will be able to, first off, obviously help us make more episodes like this, because anime ain't cheap.
Yeah.
Particularly in this economy, and obviously support both of us through, you know, whatever the hell is going on now. We don't know. Frankly, by the time this episode gets on YouTube, we might be dealing with locusts, raining blood, or something else. And we also have, you know, obviously you will be at the higher tier, which we're probably intending to be about £3. I have no idea how much that is in dollars. I think it's probably about $4, given how bad the economy is. You will be able to basically put your idea forward to be commissioned. Okay, so that will be coming so soon. We will have some more information about the other thing we vaguely hinted at the beginning of this episode. Later, we will have an official announcement. I know this is obviously a long time in advance, sometime in November. I wonder what it could be.
Yep, it has nothing to do with what we've done before. That's all I'm going to say.
That's all we're going to say. Until next time.